I'm Barbara Peters. Welcome to this episode of A Criminal Calendar. This gives me an opportunity, actually right off, although you won't be tracking with the month that we're taping this, to wish David Liss, our author, a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Barbara.
And which Happy New Year am I wishing you?
You know, that is a trick question. I don't remember the exact number.
But it would be, what, in the thousands?
In the 57 something, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Rosh Hashanah. And coming up is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement.
Yes.
Well, and it always falls in the fall, which I think creates some interesting situations sometimes for Jewish authors, but I'm gathering that for you, travel is not, because it depends on how observant you are.
Well, we're working around it, you know. I'll be home for Yom Kippur, so it's not going to be an issue.
Well, great. And I say that in part because I think one of the things that's so interesting about your first novel, anyway, is that you have got a character who is got an interesting ethnic mix for his time living in London.
Yes. Benjamin Weaver is he's Jewish, but he's been estranged from his family, so he identifies himself as a Jew, and other people identify himself as a Jew, and but he's not a practicing Jew. And he is really part of the first generation of Jews in modernity that could kind of separate out religious identity and ethnic identity and cultural identity.
Jews don't have a really great history in England. I mean, there was a horrible, was it Edward the First that expelled all the Jews? I think it was.
Yes. And then what happened was in the 17th century, a Jewish community began to trickle back, and in the 18th century there was a fairly substantial, by the standards of the day, Jewish population there. And though in my book I make it seem as though it's pretty bad place for Jews to live, it's actually one of the better places in Europe for Jews to live at the time, because while people might have said mean things to them and been not nice to them on the street, nobody was burning down homes or villages, or you know, there wasn't much of a history of violence, and so it really was just a cultural difference. And the thing also is that the English might have hated Jews, but they also hated the French, and they hated the Germans, and they hated everyone.
Especially.
They hated everyone, and you know, so Jews weren't special in being hated; they were just there.
I wondered, did some come from, I always think of Holland and England, because I know your specialty is, I mean, not specialty maybe, but you're very interested in economics and the origins of finance. And Holland and England, I always think of as having a busier merchant class, middle class.
There is a very specific history, which is after the 1688 revolution, when James II was deposed, and William of Orange and his wife Mary became king and queen jointly, they came over from the Netherlands, where there was a large and thriving Jewish community, and they brought over a lot of of William's economic advisors, who were some of whom were Jewish, and that's paved the way for a large Jewish community from Amsterdam in particular to move to London.
Your second novel, The Coffee Trader. Maybe we should backtrack back there a moment, because it's the first one in time. You are in Amsterdam in, I think, what, 1659?
That sounds right, yes.
I looked it up. It's not that I remembered it.
It's been a while since I wrote it. So.
Of course it is. But, I mean, was the coffee monopoly, or the attempt to gain corner of the market in this new commodity coffee, was that before or after the tulip mania?
That was after. The tulip mania was in the 1620s. And I chose not to write about that because I felt it was pretty well picked over. And I felt that it also retread a lot of the material that I'd worked on in my first book, A Conspiracy of Paper, which was about bubbles, and I wanted to talk about a different aspect of the market, and how, and so in Coffee Trader I talk more about commodities markets and commodity speculation, and there's no bubble per se, it's simply about how people try to manipulate and control the price of commodities.
Well, this is all fairly new stuff, isn't it?
At the time, yes. Yes, that was probably the world's first modern commodities market. And there was also this really interesting moment in history when, with the increasing colonialization of the Indies and Asia, new products were appearing, and so everybody was looking for the next nutmeg or the next cinnamon, and So in this novel, characters decide that coffee is going to be the next thing, and if they can control the market before it catches on, then they're going to be in this incredibly advantageous position.
I think your guy, he's a Portuguese Jew, right?
Right.
Or from in that community. Hadn't he had some kind of flirtation with sugar?
Yes, there was also a period in the prehistory of the novel he'd been involved in sugar trading, and that of course came from the other side of the colonial experience, the New World, and he'd lost his money in the sugar market, and so now he's trying his hand at something different.
So what's going on today is actually historically no different than...
It's, you know, it's on a larger scale,
Right.
but whenever we have some kind of major economic upheaval, and prior to the current moment, I would say the last major one was the Enron WorldCom meltdown.
Right.
It always surprises me how very much it is like a moment in the past, and how what's different is speed of information, number of actors involved, but the kinds of mistakes that people make are the same mistakes that they've been making over and over again.
It's part greed and part, I think, that you can get away with it for a while. The ramifications of it are so out that people don't think ahead towards them.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of the new book and what's happening with the current economic crisis.
Right.
And one of the conclusions I've reached is that stock traders, modern stock traders or historical stock traders, enter a state in which they exist outside of history. Because history tells you that if you, for example, are leveraging your company at 35 to 1, you're going to lose all your money. I mean, it's just inevitable. But if you're only focused on the moment, or the next day, or the next trade, or even the next quarter, you can convince yourself that you can keep going. So it becomes a kind of emotional and financial Ponzi scheme at the same time. You just need to keep afloat for now, and you don't even think about what's coming down the road, because what's coming down the road is disaster. It's just a matter of when.
Do you know anything about games theory? Have you studied games theory?
No, not.
I wrote one of my master's theses on, in the one I got in library science, information science, on games theory, because I have to admit, this is my AA moment, I was addicted to tournament bridge.
Okay.
And so I thought it would be
As games to be addicted to, that seems like, you know, not such a shameful one.
Well, it's not shameful, but it is pretty merciless.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, in fact, devote your life, you know, to what seems perhaps to others a relatively meaningless exercise. But there's several things that characterize a game, and I mean, it's what happens to gamblers that makes it irresistible as compared to the messiness of life. One is there's a finite scorekeeping system, which is also true if you're, I mean, you're in numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your measurable gains, losses, universe, and all are far more finite. Another is, and probably the most seductive, is that if you lose in a game, it's over and you can start again.
Right.
And the problem, of course, when you're not playing the game, if you're in life, is if you lose, there may not be a recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that explains a lot of what happens to people who get into this mode, is they think it's a game, or they're in that game world.
I think they're in game mode. I don't think they think it's a game. I think they know what the stakes are, but I do think that it becomes a process that's outside of the normal perception of their lives. That it becomes something segregated and isolated in their way of thinking about it. And so in that sense, it is like a game because it's roped off in a way. But I also think that if you're playing at these high risk stakes, you don't dare think about the consequence of losing, because the consequence of losing is so disastrous, and so you're just in it in a kind of timeless, a chronological way.
I think you're right, but I'm also not convinced that in their hearts they don't really think that if it all falls down they can start over again, because there are too many stories of people, you know, who have bankrupted or whatever it is, you know, who have rebuilt. And I sort of think that a lot of people get into this thinking, oh, well, even if it all crashes down, I'll start over.